And like, this is just from Ham Universe, for example. Like I got this. This is a G5RV, TO's favorite antenna.
Yeah, you can't do DX with that though.
You can't. But I was thinking
20.
about building this, and then here are the instructions to do it. So
that was the first antenna I ever built.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with it, Don?
When I got my general license, for those of you who don't know, I have my grandfather's original call from 1933. So this is a man who went back, who was, in the Depression days where they built everything out of everything. And, there was not a whole lot of antenna manufacturers as what we have today. And he said to me, he pulled me aside, he says, congratulations. He says, now you're going to build your first antenna and I'm going to help you. And he pulls it out. He says, sort of like a school teacher, which is how he always approached everything. He says, I'm going to teach you about this guy, Louis Varney. And I'm like, who's Louis Varney? And he kind of like slapped me upside the head. He said, he's G5RV. I said, no, that's the antenna name. He said, no, that's his call sign. And obviously looking at the G, for the UK. But he got into the whole thing about how this was really only made. Louis Varney made this antenna only for 20 meters. That's all he wanted for. But we used it with straight 450 ohm ladder line. And I remember we had some extra insulation on the 450, and we actually took like a cigarette lighter, the Bic lighter, and we were melting all of our connections with the insulation from the 450. So we used nothing. So we went back to old school. And again, the trick is if you can get it up 35 to 40 feet, the ladder line did not hang down totally vertical, and that's okay. It was kind of on an angle, and it went into the shack, and where I coupled it with an SO239 and right into a tuner. And listen, I made a lot of contacts. This was back in the mid 90s. I forgot where we were in the solar cycle, but man, it was fun to be on 20 and 40 and 17, and a basic tuner did it.
That's awesome, man.
There's like no black magic to it.
Yeah, a lot of people hate on the G5RV, but I got my DXCC with the G5RV.
Yeah.
So you can buy one from MFJ for like $75. Michael's asking for building, would an RSP1A be enough for a spectrum analyzer? He just got an NOVNA for that side of things. You can use the RSP1A as a spectrum analyzer, I believe. But the NanoVNA actually is not a spectrum analyzer. It's a vector network analyzer, and it allows you to measure the characteristics of an antenna. With a spectrum analyzer, I believe you can measure frequencies and signals. I'm not a spectrum analyzer expert there. You can use the RSP1A as like a waterfall or spectrum scope display. It's a little bit of a different tool, but you can hook that up to the antenna that you build, and you can do your RX on that thing, no problem.
I will say this. I don't know why there's such, I don't want to say such hate, but I don't know why guys get very opinionated about that G5RV. Because when you look at other center-fed dipoles, the center, just like any piece of wire, I don't care what you put up in the air, there's going to be some resonance. It's going to be resonant on at least one band, basically. A basic center-fed dipole is going to be resonant on it. It may not be the band that you want, but it's going to be resonant
Right.
somewhere.
Well,
and then
I think what it is, Don. Sorry, I think what it is it resembles a doublet, and people think it's a doublet, and it's not really a doublet. It's made for 20 because you're running a lot of times. You're running some pretty long coax with that, right? You have a certain length. You have a certain length of the ladder line, right?
Correct. I think it was
and then
35 or 40 feet of that, right?
And then the rest of it's coax. So it's not it's similar to a doublet, but it's not a doublet. A doublet you run your ladder line as far as you can, and then you do like a short, 10 or 12 foot piece of coax just to get in the house, right?
Right.
I actually bring my ladder line right into the house. I went through a PVC pipe and just brought it in, but because that's what I use as a doublet. So I think people confuse it with that. So what you're going to lose through that coax, and you start tuning it, you're going to lose some of your signal.
Right. I think that where part of the issue is that a lot of people get a G5RV as their first antenna. And they're inexpensive, they're approachable, and I think a lot of these guys don't put them up high enough. Maybe they put them up too high, and they mess with their far field plot or their radiation patterns. Maybe they've got bad coax that they're setting it up, and It really, I think it's more about being a new ham than it is being a bad antenna, right? Where they might have some challenges or they might have some problems.
Good point.
And then just be like, oh, this antenna sucks, and then move on to a different antenna. But when they move on to that different antenna, they take experience with them, and that experience makes them better with the next one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I've taken a dipole and strung it up and tuned it with coax. It works. And I'm sitting here talking to a guy in British Columbia, and he goes, well, that won't work. And I'm like, well, I'm talking to you on it right now.
Right.
So it's obviously working.
It's kind of working at least.
Yeah. It may not have been as perfect, but yeah. I love the doublet, though. I mean, if you want to put up a stealth antenna outside of, and I use the 300 ohm. I bought a kit from DX Engineering there, and all you have is one wire for, I use 6 to 80, no problem.
Yeah, that's
maybe
cool.